nothing but the truth. Hello, I'm Raj Chengappa of India Today and your host for Nothing But the Truth. This is my weekly X-ray of key issues that matter to you without holding back on the truth. In this episode, we are diving deep into a sudden and shocking shift in US-India relations. It's a story involving billion-dollar trade deals, tough tariffs, and explosive rhetoric from none other than Donald Trump. I'm calling the US president India's new frenemy, which is essentially a word that is both sums up being a friend as well as an enemy, and together it actually symbolizes someone who's regarded as a friend but actually turns out to be a rival or an enemy. That's why Donald Trump is in danger of becoming a frenemy. If you recall, when Donald Trump came back to power in January 2025, among the first leaders he invited to the White House was Prime Minister Narendra Modi. When they met in February, the two leaders demonstrated what is called a rare bromance, with hugging and shaking hands, and they did it profusely like old friends. Trump and Modi pledged to elevate US-India ties to an altogether whole new level in Trump's second term. Both sides committed to doubling bilateral trade in the next 5 years. And if you looked at it, from the $212 billion annually that Indo-US now trade win, that should become $500 billion by 2030. That was the promise and pledge they made. Remember that the United States or America is India's largest trading partner. And because of this particular meeting, India was seen as the first mover for reaching a trade deal with the US, ahead of the rest in the pack that were dying to negotiate with the Trump administration. Now, Indian negotiators and along with the US met for 5 times in the last 5 months, and there was hope of a mini deal on the anvil. This was to help India avoid the blanket 26% tariff Trump had imposed, if you recall, on most countries on April 2nd, and this included India, and these tariffs were to be effective August 1st. So quite some time back, Trump had threatened with 26% tariffs on all countries, including India, unless they came forward with better negotiations. Now, it looked like India was on track. Even Trump mentioned it, and suddenly the US president made a surprising and a nasty U-turn towards his friend Modi by venting his frustrations in public about India. Now, not since Bill Clinton in 1998, when, if you recall, he threatened to come down like a ton of bricks, and he told this to his key interlocutors, that if, especially after India conducted its nuclear test, and since then, no US president has spoken as disparagingly about India as Donald Trump has done recently. Just to give you a few idea of what all Donald Trump said, first on July 30th, Trump took to his platform Truth Social and launched a series of fiery posts against India. Now, he accused India of having, and some of this is in quote, the most strenuous and obnoxious non-monetary trade barriers for any country. Then he ramped it up a notch. Trump said India is Russia's largest buyer of energy, along with China, at a time when everyone wants Russia, and he puts this in all caps, to stop the killing in Ukraine, and then added in all caps again, all things not good. And he didn't stop there. Trump then slammed India with a 25% tariff starting August 7th, and he warned that if India continued to buy oil from Russia, he would impose an additional penalty. And the very next day, he again doubled down, posting on Truth Social that he didn't care if India and Russia take their dead economies down together. That's right. He called India a dead economy. Then this doesn't end. On August 6th, Trump went ahead and imposed an additional 25% ad valorem duty effective within 21 days, which would mean that by the fourth week of August, India would pay, or Indian exporters would pay an average duty to the US of 50%. Let that sink in for a moment. 50% for Indian goods that are exported to the US. Right now, only Brazil is facing comparable trade penalties. Even China, whom Trump often calls his arch rival, is only facing tariffs of up to 30%. So much for someone Trump considers a friend. He puts the highest tariff, which is 50%. There is, of course, one silver lining for India. Key exports to the US in goods such as electronics, pharmaceuticals, and petroleum products were exempted from the new tariffs. Together, they make up about 40% of India's total merchandise exports of $87 billion. Also, as of now, Trump hasn't called off trade negotiations with India. In fact, an American team is expected in New Delhi in the last week of August for the 6th round of trade talks. So he hasn't broken off completely. He has imposed very high tariffs. Now, the Modi government was understandably displeased, and though Trump called himself a true friend, he's had slapped massive tariffs on India, and this, of course, was not exactly welcomed by the ruling dispensation and even the public in India. So what did the Modi government do, or what was India's response? Let's say it was correctly measured but firm. The Ministry of External Affairs issued a statement calling the 50% hike that Trump did, and I'm quoting them, unfair, unjustifiable, and unreasonable. The MEA then added that India would take all actions necessary to protect India's national interest. Firm and clear that India will not yield when it comes to trade negotiations, especially in certain quarters. Of course, that didn't stop Indian exporters from worrying deeply about what has happened. The Federation of Indian Export Organizations called the tariff hikes that Trump did a severe setback. They warned, these exporters warned, that it could impact over 55% of Indian shipments to the US. And once the additional 25% penalty kicks in, India could suffer a 30 to 35% competitive disadvantage compared to its peers, and the textile and apparel sectors is likely to be hit first. Already it is battling stiff competition from China and Vietnam, and the exporters fear that Indian goods will not be able to compete with the other countries given the high tariffs that America has imposed on India. Now, what made this whole episode feel like a bolt from the blue was how dramatically the tone in India-US relations shifted in just a few months. And you can see that given the fact that Trump had met Modi, they had shook hands, hugged each other, and talked of building a whole new strategic partnership, and suddenly this U-turn where Trump comes down heavily on India. And so now let's examine why Trump became India's frenemy. The first is with the trade deal itself that he wanted to strike with India. He seems to be been disappointed by the way the negotiations went. In fact, while negotiating, India had shown a willingness to lower its average of 17% tariffs. Of course, tariffs range from 10 to, say, even 80% on many of India's goods, but the average is about 17% on manufacturing and industrial goods, which is, of course, far higher than the 2% that the US had put on Indian goods before all this happened. But India is a developing country, and it required the kind of protection that it needed so that its own markets were not flooded by cheap goods from elsewhere in the world. So Trump was upset with that, and he wanted a reduction. And so India had, in fact, brought its, in terms of manufacturing and industrial goods, offered substantial reductions in its tariff, and also addressed the key issue that Trump had talked about, given the fact that there's about a $41 to $45 billion trade surplus that India had, And Trump wanted to bring that down considerably, and India demonstrated that if they brought down the tariffs, that particular aspect could be taken care of. But Trump wanted more. And the talks stalled when America insisted that India open its sensitive agriculture and dairy sectors. Now, let's look at why India was so resistant on opening out its agriculture sector and was firm about not doing so. And there are two good reasons why they're doing that. Let's discuss them. One, American farmers use genetically modified crops or GM crops, something India has only approved of in cotton. In 2002, India allowed what is called BT cotton, which was a genetically modified cotton that was resistant to the bollworm, which is the biggest pest that India faced when it grew cotton. But in this case, America wanted to sell us soya beans and maize grown from GM seeds, which is a real no-no for India. Now, as I mentioned, India so far permitted only GM cotton to be grown in India. And while that had helped boost cotton production, new pests have started destroying the cotton crops. And there is a huge question about using GM crops as a way to boost agriculture productivity, because in the long run, it could have deleterious effects, not only to the crops, but also, they believe, in some senses, modifying these could impact human health too. So, barring the US, most countries have not moved towards GM seeds. Take Europe, for instance, a maximum number of the countries are against it. And India has felt for long that if they brought in GM seeds apart from cotton, it would destroy the local varieties of food grain that we have, and we would become dependent on foreign companies for seed supply. This would be a new form of colonialism that India didn't want to get into. So it was very, very clear that it would not allow GM food or GM grains to come into India and completely destroy the Indian agriculture, particularly the grain market that was there. The second is that the second reason that India was against opening up the agriculture sector was that the agriculture sector employs nearly 40 to 45% of India's labor force. Now, any surge in imports could be catastrophic for farmers and workers. They could lose millions of jobs. Remember that India by itself grows a large amount of maize or corn and soya beans. And if we allow cheaper US food grains, that, by the way, are actually subsidized by the US government, it would be disastrous for Indian farmers. They would be out of jobs, and we would become dependent on America for our supply of these grains. Now, let's take a look at another sector that India was against opening out, and this is the dairy sector. There was a concern that India had expressed to America and to the rest of the world that it will not accept any kind of dairy products where the cattle feed, especially in America, includes byproducts like blood, meat, and bone meal. And this was, or these ingredients clash with Indian food safety laws and cultural sensitivities. And this is not imposed by the Modi government. This has been there for decades now, that India does not allow these kind of feed to enter that has material that is drawn from animals, whether the cow or any other thing. We are dead against it. India had already agreed and had made what they call certain concessions to America to allow imports on horticultural goods like apples and dry fruits, but India drew clear red lines on grains and dairy products. Now, most experts see Donald Trump's tariff blitz as part of a larger gambit. Trump wants India to lower its trade barriers while accepting US tariffs. And this is one of his gambits. The only way he sees he can bring Indian tariffs down is to actually threaten them with high tariffs. So when India negotiates, it might end up with 23, 24%, though it would have wanted much less. So that's one of Trump's gambits that was there. And the additional 25% was essentially to force Russia to agree to a swift end to the Ukraine war. India is one of Russia's largest buyer of its oil. In fact, next to China, we are the second largest, and we are almost equal to China. In June, we both imported 2 billion barrels of oil every day. And so this was something that America said had to stop. But there was, let's put it, tremendous amount of double standards that Trump exhibited, which the MEA exposed. That is the Ministry of External Affairs. And they pointed out in a statement that both the US and Europe had previously encouraged India to buy Russian oil, and that too at a cap price, to help stabilize global markets. In fact, India had saved the world in terms of its purchases of Russian oil, because if Russian oil was not allowed to be bought by countries like India, which are large consumers, you would have seen international oil prices go up, and that would have impacted global markets worldwide, including India, with inflation and everything else. So also, let's look at the irony. China has been buying over 2 billion barrels of oil per day from Russia, and yet Trump hasn't gone after China, and that's because American manufacturers depend heavily on Chinese imports, and they are worried about retaliatory actions by China that could see American goods get costlier, or in fact, America begin to lose out on a lot of critical exports from China that they are dependent on. So Trump has actually exhibited double standards on this, allowing his arch rival, China, to get away with Russian imports. And when asked, he said, well, just wait, we're going to do something. But clearly, India is upset that Trump chose us to be the target as collateral damage in trying to strike a quick deal with Russia and end the war in Ukraine because of that. Now, Trump is miffed with India for other reasons too. And though he has not stated it, if you recall, he has made the claim now for over 30 times, some say even 35 times, that he had helped stop the recent war between India and Pakistan. But the Modi government has steadfastly denied it and maintained it was Pakistan that pleaded directly with India to stop it. And Trump, of course, who is looking and made it quite clear that he would be happy to win the Nobel Prize because his predecessor, Barack Obama, had won the Nobel Prize. And therefore, Trump feels that if he is able to bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, if he's able to, as he said, settle the India-Pakistan war, and if he somehow brings peace back to the Gaza and what's happening, the Israel war that's happening over there, he would be eligible for the Nobel Prize. That's what experts say. That's one of the reasons why he's upset with India, because he believes that he had helped stop the war between the two countries before it reached a flashpoint or a nuclear flashpoint. Now, there are other reasons, of course, that pertain to business, and Trump wants India to lift the rules pertaining to what is called data localization that India insists on. And a lot of the big Silicon Valley firms, the Silicon Valley giants, are upset with India for imposing this data localization rule and wants India to lift it. So that is another sticky point or sticking point in the trade negotiation that India is having with the US. Now let's look at how India should respond. One of the people I spoke to is Ajay Srivastava, who's the founder of the Global Trade Research Institute and a former Indian trade negotiator. And he looks at it more on the fact that he believes that all these actions means that Trump actually wants a deal with India and is pushing hard for it. According to him, these are just pressure tactics that Trump is well known for. He is not fed up with India. Otherwise, he would have announced the termination of the deal. And he says, and I'm quoting Ajay Srivastava on this, I see this as a pause in the negotiations, a comma, not a full stop. I spoke to other experts on this, and one of them was Syed Akbaruddin, the respected former India ambassador, or the former permanent representative to the UN, India's former permanent representative to the UN, and he believes that Trump's demands are more tactical than strategic. And he explains his stand. He says in the past too, trade disputes have resulted in debilitating battles between the US and Europe and even Japan, so don't be surprised, and rarely have these led to a rupture of ties between countries. So they actually fight when they want to trade goods and try to get the best deal, and this is a classic example of the kind of exchanges that happen. Normally it happens behind closed doors, but as with Donald Trump, you can expect all of them to be done in public, and all the whatever he does it, with in a way that only you can describe Trump can, in a brutal fashion, uncaring about what the countries and people think, and he expresses whatever comes to his mind at that particular moment. And therefore, Akbaruddin says, don't think these would rupture ties. In the past also, America has negotiated with other countries and there have been harsher words exchanged. Then he points out that India and the US have strategic convergence, including in defense and taking on China. So there is a lot more that binds the two nations together. It's become too important a relationship to just rest on trade. It has in fact expanded to a whole gamut of areas, critical areas that make the friendship stronger. And even though there may be differences on trade, it need not upset the entire apple cart. Now, that's a point of view. Some agree, some don't. Now, let's look at what is the best case scenario for India. One of them is, which even Akbaruddin talked about, is a quick resolution to the Ukraine war, which would ease tensions between the US and Russia and let India off the hook. That's the hope. But if that doesn't happen, the advice is India must stay calm, avoid retaliatory tariffs, and keep negotiating, while also diversifying trade partners. Very, very important that we start looking elsewhere as well, so that we have a backstop operations in case trade with America drops. We have alternatives ready which can offset the kind of loss our exporters might face by not being able to export to the US. But the Modi government has made one thing clear. It will not bow to Trump's pressure or US pressure. For example, after the US tariffs kicked in, Prime Minister Modi addressed an agricultural conference in Delhi, and his message was clear. And I'm quoting him, "For us, the interests of our farmers are the highest priority. India will never compromise on their interests, and I personally may have to pay a very heavy price for this, but I am ready." That's Prime Minister Modi's words, indicating that the agriculture sector and the dairy product sector is a no-no, and that is a red line that is drawn, even if it means it's a deal breaker. Meanwhile, the Ministry of External Affairs, and this is the interesting Indian tactic that is building, has indicated that Prime Minister Modi may attend the August 31st Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin in China. And if he does, it would be Modi's first visit to China since 2018. If you remember, after that, COVID happened, then the Galwan intrusions, and India-China relations plunged to its nadir during the last 3-4 years, before now slowly the threads are being picked up. And this potential bilateral meeting with President Xi Jinping of China would send a strong message to the US, India, and the message is that India is committed to its strategic autonomy. It will not be bullied by Donald Trump in giving up its relations and trying to focus only on the US. And there was another indication of that when on August 7th, the National Security Advisor, Mr. A.K. Doval, who's seen to be very, very close to the Prime Minister, met Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Putin signaled that he would visit India later this year. So you have two of the biggest countries that Trump has been trying to negotiate with, who Trump believes is pivotal for global relations. They have now started veering towards each other, and this is a signal to Trump that he cannot browbeat us into a trade deal that does not serve our national interests. So if you look back, of course, even in America, if you take a look at what's happening in America, experts are concerned over there I spoke to Professor Sumit Ganguly, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and he says, and this is his quotes, the US president's current approach to India is short-sighted and counterproductive. He went on to tell me it risks undermining all the progress that has been made in US-India relations in the past couple of decades. Remember, India-US relations after the nuclear explosion that India did, the nuclear test that India did in 1998, again plunged to its lowest, where US put sanctions on, and it has taken 20 years of rebuilding ties with India to bring it to the level of being not only a trusted but a strategic partner, which Trump threatens to undo by his actions. Now, he is clear that India shouldn't yield on US demands to open up agriculture because he says we all know it would be disastrous. And he also reminds America that India is a valuable market for America's high-end weaponry, and pertinently says India is certainly not a dead economy that Donald Trump calls it. This is from Professor Sumit Ganguly, who is at Stanford University at the Hoover Foundation over there, talking about the US president and his actions against India. Now, other experts believe India should offer a long-term investment package that gives Donald Trump a short-term political win. If you recall, that a lot of the countries that he's struck deals with, actually, these are just 2 sheets of paper where they've reached a deal. There's a lot more negotiations that are there. Europe has promised billions of dollars down the line to be invested by European companies in the US. Japan has also done that. But as everyone knows, that Trump's term is only for another 3 more years. And he gets, US president gets 4 years. And he will soon depart the scene. And a lot of these extreme measures might not be implemented by the next president. So the idea is to promise big but deliver small. And India could use that by potentially offering juicy investments that India could do and then drag it out so that it becomes easy for India to implement. Of course, Trump is a sharp negotiator and he will see through it. But right now he wants a win-win with India, or a win for himself. It's, when he's talking about the fact that he brings the world's largest democracy to the table and has been able to successfully negotiate a deal that he had complained, even in his first term, that India was a tariff king, and he had brought it to the table and was able to hammer it down. That's the win that Trump wants. Rohit Lamba, an assistant professor of economics at Cornell University, in a very perceptive article in the Indian Express recently, talked of how India should start building pressure among American consumers of how high tariffs could hurt them in everyday goods, including medicines, if Trump began to raise tariffs in India beyond a certain point. Now remember this, India supplies almost half or even more than half their prescription pharmaceutical drugs, and that is because these are far cheaper than the rest of the US importers. And the moment Trump begins to raise the tariffs on pharmaceuticals, remember, he has so far exempted pharmaceuticals, Indian pharmaceuticals, from the tariffs. The moment he does this, drug prices in America would shoot up, and this is something he doesn't want. So one of the things that Rohit Lamba says is now to start educating US consumers that what would be the impact if Trump imposed the tariffs on India, and how their own day-to-day needs, especially their health needs, could be seriously impacted. Now, Lamba also talks of a counter threat of India to raise tariffs on goods. And he says, do it like what Trump does, is that announce that in 3 months' time, if Trump doesn't drop the tariffs, India would impose high tariffs on goods that America exports to us, and these include California almonds, Washington apples, and a lot of goods. And this could create pressure among US business who are keen to export to India. And simultaneously, India could make a range of broad concessions on luxury goods and automobiles, and also purchase of natural gas that Trump wants from America. And these carrots would make American business get Trump to see reason and not to come down so hard on India. So the idea is not just to remain silent or negotiate with Trump's arch enemies and show that we can do business with others as well, especially when it comes to China, but also to start playing our hand, which is to seemingly give him a win when we negotiate by saying that we'll make the kind of investments that he wanted us to do, by lowering tariffs, as we've already agreed on a whole host of them, and saying, look, agriculture is a no-no, but we could offer you other things when it comes, and meanwhile, simultaneously bring pressure in the US by both in terms of business, by showing what would happen if India retaliated, and also to American consumers, what would happen if Trump raised the tariffs beyond a certain point. It would begin to hit America hard and inflation in their daily goods. Now, other experts talk of India very interestingly using tactics that China does. Remember, China uses countries like Vietnam and Southeast Asian countries to export a lot, even to India, of goods that normally would not reach them because we have, for instance, put high tariffs against Chinese goods coming in. So this is through the back door. So what one expert says, why don't we find third countries that face less American tariffs and export Indian products, allow them to have a certain limited value upgrade to these countries that we export to, so that they can then in turn export it to the US at cheaper tariffs, and we cash in on the differential. So of course, these are all tactics that India could employ to start mitigating the kind of impact that could happen if, for instance, the 50% tariffs come in and Indian exporters face a serious competitive disadvantage because of that. Ultimately, most analysts agree that US-India relations will be bumpy in the short term. There will be costs to the Indian economy, but this crisis could also become an opportunity for India to diversify its trade. There's a whole lot of markets in Africa that that have not been explored, Central Asia, Middle East. This is the time that we could use as an opportunity to become trade competitive across the world, not necessarily just in America. And that is for the Modi government to work out where it could bring out the kind of concessions that are necessary for our exporters so that they can widen their basket and look elsewhere, look to other countries, as I'd mentioned, Africa, Central Asia, Middle East. There's a whole range of countries that would want Indian products, and this is the time to show that kind of entrepreneurial spirit to go ahead and do it. And therefore, we should find new partners and strengthen our global influence. After all, as experts say, it's never wise to put all your eggs in one basket and depend solely on the US. My final bit is that it is really time. Let's not forget that India and US have very good relations with each other, except till now. And it's really time that Donald Trump and Narendra Modi, sooner rather than later, should pick up their phones and speak to each other and sort out their differences. From friends, they have now turned frenemies. They should not look at each other as enemies. The relationship is too important for the world's largest democracies to be at daggers drawn with each other. So it's time they got speaking and sorted out their differences. Thank you for being with me in this episode of Nothing But the Truth. I look forward to having you with me next week. Nothing but the truth.